Welcome back to our weekly live stream where we discuss all the things moving to Georgia. Hi, I'm Sarah Maslowski with KeyPoint Homes Group, and we have Ashley Lazarian, my business partner, joining us tonight. Hey, Ashley.
Hey, Sarah, how are you doing?
I am good. It has been a very busy week. I have my sweater on. It's been
Yes.
chilly here in Georgia this week. We've had a drastic dip in temperatures, and I'm sure people in the north are going to laugh at us, but the high was around 55 yesterday, 60 today. That's cold here.
It's freezing cold, especially for this time of year. I feel like Monday it was 70, and then I went to soccer practice that night and it dropped to like 30. I thought I was going to die.
Yeah, I saw another real estate agent today, and she had a beanie on, a scarf, and a sweater. And, we just like jump into the cold weather clothes as soon as we get an opportunity to.
We're from the South. Our blood is thin.
That's right. So today on the live, we are talking about should you wait to buy a home in Georgia? And this is a question that we have gotten a lot from people that we speak to. And it's no wonder why people may be thinking this, because if you look at the news headlines, it seems very scary out there.
It does. Obviously I say it all the time, but the headlines are there to terrify, not clarify. So, looking at those, yeah, those right
Yeah.
there. I
Yeah.
mean, that would scare the crap out of you.
Right. You're thinking, oh my gosh, it's incredibly expensive to buy a house right now. And look what
Just
mortgage
doom
rates
and
are
gloom.
doing. And then you see like the economy's crashing, home prices are falling, and it can create a ton of uncertainty for buyers and sellers that are out there right now, considering like what to do in this market.
Yeah, it sounds like doom and gloom all over, but the reality, like, if you kind of break it down a little bit further, I mean, there's definitely going to be markets throughout the country that are going to see a little bit of a dip, but we have to keep things into perspective.
100%. And so we thought it would be fun to do a deep dive into an article that was recently published on fortune.com. And so I am going to get that pulled up onto the screen, and let's get that there. Let's see. Bear with me here.
Gotta love technology.
That's not the right
There we go.
thing. There we go. Okay. So, this was a recent article in fortune.com. It came across my Apple news feed, and I was like, oh, we need to take a look at this. It says where home prices in your local housing market are headed in 2023, according to Zillow's revised forecast. So, as we all know, where we're at this year in the market is drastically different from where we expected it to be back early in 2022. And so Zillow made a bold call. It said it predicted that the pandemic housing boom would see U.S. home prices soar another almost 18% between February 2022 and February 2023. And that has come to a halt. Obviously, they've had to revise those estimates.
Definitely. But I mean, I will say that you and I talking about this and kind of scrolling through, there was one of those slides before that talked about a lot of what we see as far as those headlines is nationwide. And when we break it down to our area, Georgia specific, and then like you did here, breaking it down even further city by city, are we going to see the, 20% rises that we saw last year? No. And quite frankly, thank God. But when you look at this, there's still positives.
Right. So if we take a closer look at this, I'm making this bigger for you here at home, but it says it's showing that the shift in home values between May 2022 and August 22, and this kind of gives you a heat map of across the country of what we're seeing. Obviously, those in red are areas where home values have shifted. And then obviously areas in blue, that's where home values are gaining. And you see a drastic difference here. You see, East Coast versus West Coast. We definitely see home prices falling out on the West Coast and gaining on the East Coast. But we know this, right? Because we experienced the housing market from earlier this year to kind of like the end of the summer, where we were still seeing, great home price appreciations. And then come the summer, inflation, the war, everything that's happening, and you see all these headlines saying that home prices are falling and the sky is falling in the real estate market. So what this study did is it went and said, okay, where are home prices going to go in the next 3 months? So in between September of 2022 all the way through the end of December. And when you take a look at the heat map there, you obviously see the colors are cooling off, right? They're not as vibrant. And yet you still see the area of the Southeast region, and you still see in Georgia, we don't have any red. We're not predicting any home price values to decrease in the latter quarter of this year.
Yeah. So that's, when you break it down area by area, state by state, it definitely has a different tone. And so a lot of times when you're watching the news, which I personally do not watch the news anymore, I live in my little happy bubble until my husband comes and tells me something that I need to know that kind of pops it a little bit. But when you look at, everything all together on any of the news channels, it's kind of giving us a broad spectrum. And when you kind of break it down for Georgia specifically, and then, like you said, even further down into the cities, we're not really seeing any major dips. We're still seeing a little bit of increase, even if it's minimal. And realistically, even if this next year we were to plateau and not go up at all, I would still take that as a win after, the markets that we've just had.
100%. And so the title of this video and what we're trying to help you at home decide is like, should you buy a home in Georgia this year? So despite the economic news and the headlines that you're seeing, you have to take a look at Georgia specifically and our region specifically, because those articles are talking about the nation as a whole. And so when we look at these expert predictions from Zillow, and we look at what is going to happen between home prices and home values between September 2022 all the way to September of next year, right? Because that's what we want to know. We want to know, are home prices going to continue to rise? Are they going to fall? Are they going to follow the headlines? Like, what is going on? And again, you can see the same heat map, and you see that, when we narrow down into the area that we most likely serve and where you're probably looking to move to. So you've got the Alpharetta, Sandy Springs, Alpharetta area, Atlanta, they are predicting home prices to rise 3.4% over the next year. And if you get a little bit more granular, they're in Gainesville, they're expecting home prices to rise 4% over the next year. And so you see all these areas in blue, those are the areas that we are going to have home prices rise. And then you see throughout the country, you have all this red. That is where they're predicting home prices to fall. So when they're talking about what home prices are doing nationally, they're averaging all of this data together and getting the average median sales price and saying that home prices are falling. Where we're really seeing that is in these overvalued markets throughout the country, where you have those home values that are falling and devaluing. Whereas here in the metro Atlanta area and most of the areas in Georgia, you are seeing that we are having a normal return to a normal level of appreciation in home prices.
One of the things that gets me though, Sarah, is some of those areas that they're showing a decline in value. If you really look at some of those numbers, I know you were just hovering over some of them. Some of them are like 0.2. I think that the most that one was like 5%. So over the last couple of years, we've risen, most areas at least 20%, if not more. And so even if we were to take a 5% hit, this next year, we rose so much last year that realistically we're not losing. If we were dropping 40%, yes, please, everyone hold on to your butts. But we're not seeing that happen. So even in those red zones, which thankfully we live in a state that we're not seeing that, but even in those red areas, they're not having major losses.
Yeah. And that is such a good point. So even if you are in an area where you've bought a house there, and you've recently bought it and you're saying, oh no, those home prices are falling, that's a great perspective. And that really you had, incredible year-over-year gains in equity in those houses. And so you're not really fully realizing that loss of where you were whenever you bought. I don't know if that's making any sense.
Yeah.
So I will share, let's see, another statistic kind of like looking more specifically into those areas of Georgia and where we're seeing those home prices continue to rise across Georgia. And we are, seeing that in a lot of areas in Georgia. So what I'm sharing with you here, this is the data directly from Zillow of what they use to put into that heat map. And so here we see that they're taking the base evaluation of the house on September 30th of 2022. This is how much they are expecting home prices to increase by the end of October. We're almost there. Here it is by the end of the year, the percentage they're expecting it to increase. And here we are a year later at the end of September 2023, how much we're expecting home prices to increase. And so we see across metro Atlanta area, they're expecting these home prices to rise almost 3.5%. You come down here to the Gainesville area, that's a 4%. We have the Jefferson area, almost 5%. And so that is a smaller area that we talk about on our channel. And we have clients that we serve in Jefferson, but that's a rural metro-ish area that is seeing a lot of growth. And so that's not surprising, for you and I to look at that data and say, yeah, that kind of tracks with what we're seeing here locally.
Yeah, and I know, I guess it was about 2 weeks ago, and last week, actually, we had a couple of people that were asking questions about in the areas that we serve, in the suburbs of Metro Atlanta, where do we think, as the realtors, where do we think that we're going to see some of those areas that are going to increase in value more than others? Or where do we think, like you always hear about Alpharetta, Swanee, Buford, places like that. So where are the places that are going to kind of explode next? And that was a conversation that we were having. And so Jefferson was one of those places that you and I have talked about. And I know we kind of talked about on a live a couple weeks ago as kind of like the up and coming. So it's exciting to see those numbers that, by the end of next year, they're still going to have some of the larger increases.
Yeah. And so one of the hardest things that we experience as real estate agents is, at the end of the day, whatever people decide to do, whether they buy now or whether they wait, it's a very, very personal decision. And we view our role as a real estate agent as providing the very best data that we can to help you make the most informed decision that you can for you and your family. And it's still your decision at the end of the day. Making these videos, we often, actually get comments of saying like, well, of course they want to tell you this information. They want you just to buy a house. And the only thing we care about is real estate commission.
Right.
And, as if we had that much control over people's personal decision to buy a house.
Right.
But that's really what we see our role as, is just giving you this information and helping you kind of make sense of it and how it applies on a local level, because these national headlines are so scary. And the worst thing that we want, or what we don't want to happen, is you waiting to buy a house and then that house that you could have afforded last year, maybe now it's outside of your price range because home prices continue to increase, and you're saying, but wait, no one told me that that was going to happen and that all the experts are predicting that, and I should have bought last year.
Right. I think a lot of people over the last couple of years, you and I both have been in this business for quite some time, and you always hear timing the market. And it is truly almost impossible to time the market, because this year alone has been one of those that is proven that more than ever, because you could have purchased earlier this year at a super low interest rate, but you were paying top dollar. Or now you're getting, a corrected market. However, you're getting higher interest rates. So you literally are flip-flopped. Which one do you want? You can't have your cake and eat it too. And so it's just one of those things where there's always going to be something going on. And I know that a lot of people right now that are choosing to go ahead and buy, they're choosing to go ahead and buy, even though the interest rate is a little bit higher, because they're paying attention to what the market is saying. And all systems point to, by this time next year, and especially going into 2024, the interest rates are going to reduce. So if they can go ahead and buy a home now, not have as much competition on the buying side, with multiple offers and things like that, which I have to say, I got a big surprise last weekend when I went to show a house. There was a line of people, and I was like, y'all, I thought we were over this. Please go away. Because I want my buyer to get in there. But a lot of buyers are still looking to purchase right now because there's not as much competition in some cases. And then next year they're able to refinance and get that better rate.
Yeah. And so this was a really great quote from Redfin's chief economist, and he said that for those of y'all that are waiting on these home price crashes, you're going to have to keep waiting. And what we're seeing specifically here in the Atlanta area that's really protecting and insulating us is that demand is still pretty high relative to the rest of the country. And that is really what's still protecting these home values. And that's why, those graphs are continuing to show you that experts are predicting that home prices are going to continue to rise, and in the areas that we serve. And yes, we're still seeing, just like you said, Ashley, for really well-priced homes and the best homes on the market, there's still, sometimes a line of people waiting to get into that home.
Yes, we're not seeing it as often, and to be totally transparent, we're not seeing it as often. Earlier this year, it was quite frustrating because every home you went to, you had to wait in line to get in, or you're fighting other agents to get in there. We haven't been seeing that as often. We've been seeing what I feel like is a normal market. After 17 years of doing this, it's normal to see regular appointments, but not always overlapping. But last weekend I went to show. It was a beautiful home, had a pool, great price in Alpharetta. And darn if there wasn't 13 people standing outside and walking through that home. And I was just like, go away.
Ashley, we have a Milton watching us from Brazil, and it's 7:00 there. I think you're the first probably Brazilian that we've had comment on our live stream. So welcome, and thank you for watching us and joining us.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Our good friend Anthony asked, other than Jefferson, are there other areas you're seeing that are growing similarly?
Similarly. Yeah,
Yes.
similarly. I would say one of the areas that I've been paying attention to is like the Monroe and Loganville areas. Monroe has been doing a lot to their downtown. It's absolutely adorable now. And Anthony, I know you and I actually went and looked at some properties out there the other day. Monroe is still a quiet, small town. But they're doing some amazing building out there with some of the homes that they have, and the affordability there is so much more that you can find elsewhere. And I would have to say another area is Lilburn. Lilburn is one of those places that it was on the rise for a long time, and then it kind of dipped down when like Swanee, Duluth, Beaufort, all of those places started to come around. But then Lilburn is still a little bit closer into the city than some of those other locations. And so we've really seen Lilburn come out and do like a revamp these last 5 years. And they're really doing some great things over there.
Yeah, I would also add to your list Dawsonville. That's an area that we've talked about before here, that's really growing and booming. Commerce, Winder area, those areas are really growing as well.
Yeah. I always forget Dawsonville for some reason, but that definitely is one. I feel like they have more restaurants than we do.
Yeah. Let's see here. We have James and Evelyn watching us from Miami.
Yes, I was actually just emailing back and forth with James and Evelyn earlier. They're going to come to visit in Georgia in December.
Yeah, and they said they're excited to check out Beaufort and Cumming.
Yes, that's awesome.
Those are two fantastic areas that I feel like you kind of have the best of both worlds in those areas, because you have all the shopping, restaurants, things. You're close to a lot of things. You got lots of great neighborhoods, and
close to the lake.
Yeah, you're close to the lake. Very, very popular areas. Can get a little bit crowded with traffic, but that's the number one thing you're going to hear from everyone, no matter where you talk to them from. So Maitland and I were out at a festival this past weekend, and we were asking people like what their favorite things were about living in Gainesville and what they did not like living in Gainesville. And it was so funny because all of these local people said traffic, 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 traffic. And I'm sure, y'all watching us from Miami and all these other larger cities, or heck, even if you lived in Atlanta and you came here, you'd be like, oh, this traffic is amazing. What traffic? Right. There's no traffic. But things are always relative to where you live and what you're used to.
Yeah, definitely.
Paul has a question here. He said, why would the new construction home sellers, Pulte and Lennar, offer interest incentives and discounts if they know that the housing market will recover soon? Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's a great one. So a lot of times what you'll see builders do is they do not want standing inventory. So after 2008, and I personally worked for a builder from 2005 to 2009 ish. Um, so 2005, six, seven, I mean, we were cranking them out. We were building as fast as we possibly could. And we loved having standing inventory at that time because then it was like, oh, Sarah, you need a home in 30 days? I've got you covered. Or Sarah, you're not moving for 6 months. That's fine. You can custom build. So there were options for you. Well, then what happened in 2008? We crashed.
Right.
And they had massive amounts of debt. And a lot of those builders went bankrupt. They lost everything because they had so much money tied up in homes that were sitting and they couldn't give them away. And obviously, if they were selling them for below cost, then you had the homeowners that you just sold to that were angry, and some of them were even suing the builders because they had just paid, $200,000 more for this same home. So home builders do not want standing inventory. And what you've seen happen is last year when we had this big boom of everybody wanting to get into something, home builders were doing everything they possibly could to keep up with demand. And it was just virtually impossible. We were going into some places, some builders, and they're like, we're 12 to 2 years out, 12 months to 2 years out. Like, sign up, get in line. And they just could not keep up because you have to think about, we never really caught up from 2008. Like builders never started to build at the rate that they did prior to 2008. And so when this, last 2 years kind of hit, builders were not prepared for that. And so they've been cranking them out, trying to keep up with that demand. Well, now that demand is kind of paused. Or you're having people say, Sarah, you signed a contract last year because you're in the craze. And then you're like, look, my job started. I've got to get into something. I'll lose my earnest money. Ashley, get me into a house. I'll take a resale. So now you've, terminated that contract with the builder. Well, now that builder's got a home that's sitting.
Yeah.
And I think multiple people have done that. And so they're going to do whatever they have to do to get that standing inventory gone.
So I think another thing to point out to you, Paul, is that these builders are also paying interest every single day that this house is still on the market. So they have huge carrying cost, and likely their carrying cost, that interest rate is variable as well. And it's for a very, very short period of time. So it's costing them a lot of money to keep it. And another thing about buying down interest rates and things like that, you have to keep in mind that for a lot of buyers, unless you're paying with cash, your purchasing power has changed drastically because of the interest rates increasing. So we had a good example of a seller that we had recently. A buyer was pre-approved, under contract to buy our seller's house. Our seller was then buying a house from another person, and their buyer got into financing trouble and could not complete the loan with their current lender. Well, they locked in a rate at 6%. And now when they're trying to pivot to a different lender to save that loan and allow them to still be able to buy the house, well, the interest rates in that 2-week time period had jumped up almost a full percentage point. And so now they're looking at a monthly payment that's much more expensive than when they originally went under contract. And that's having them rethink, like, I don't know if I want to do this. So
Yeah,
that's the same thing that builders are experiencing. It's the same thing that the buyers are experiencing out there in the market. And so it's a great time as a buyer to leverage the ability that you have as a buyer to negotiate with home sellers and home buyers, or home builders rather. We are seeing a lot of incentives or a lot of negotiations. And what we do know is that buying down the interest rate and getting the seller to cover that cost impacts you much more greatly than lowering the price of the house. Lowering the price of the house $5,000 or $10,000 may save you $30 or $40 a month on your monthly payment. However, buying down that interest rate could save you hundreds of dollars a month on your monthly payment. So that is why you're seeing builders do that to help make that home more affordable for the buyers that are out there in the marketplace right now. Great question.
Yeah, definitely.
Clyde says he is buying a home in the Lawrenceville area, closing in December. How soon can I refinance the following year for a lower rate?
I would say, as soon as interest rates are starting to correct, I would start talking to a lender, where you have to kind of, watch this. And this is why I always say having a relationship with a lender is so important. You shouldn't be just talking to your lender when you're ready to buy a house. If you have a good lender, you should be talking to them, regularly, just kind of getting a feel and a pulse of what's going on in the market. Because you don't want to you make that jump as soon as we start to see a correction, because just like they inched up, they will probably inch back down. And so you want to, try and time that to when you see them where they've come down and then they're staying where they are, because that's when you can kind of usually get to a point of, okay, we're at where we're going to stay. And so I would advise Clyde talking to a lender, keeping that relationship going. I think you're probably going to see the end of 2023, beginning of 2024 is the timeline that you should probably look at that.
Yeah. And so Ryan says, he said, I'm going to do like y'all taught us last week, date the rate. So what we talked about last week was date the rate, marry the house. One of the things that we know about interest rates is that they go up, they go down. Historically, if we're looking at this from a historic bird's eye view, 40,000 foot view, historic interest rates are still pretty low compared to the highs of where they have been. Talk to your parents, or maybe some of you watching remember interest rates, buying a house at 18% interest rate. So you just have to keep that in mind. And yes, there are going to be opportunities in the future to refinance your house into a lower rate. One of our great lenders that we work with actually just informed us of a great incentive that they're offering right now, that any buyer that purchases a house with them and uses their company for a loan, if you want to refinance down the road, you're going to get a $1,500 credit to be used at a future time to help with that refinancing cost. That's a huge, huge savings. And this is something similar that we have seen like Rocket Mortgage do. Don't ever use Rocket Mortgage. And so it's amazing that we have like a really great lender partner locally here that is essentially matching and doing that exact same thing for our clients, so that you get really great service, really great rates, and you're able to take advantage of, those types of tools.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. And, again, going back to having a relationship with a lender, they have different programs that are out there right now. And I know a lot of people are like, well, I hear of the 5-1 arm, and that reminds me of 2008, and we're going to crash because of that again. When I say that things are different now, they are drastically different. These are not the same programs that we saw back in 2008. They are so much stricter. They are putting a cap on what that adjusted mortgage could go to. They are qualifying buyers based on what the highest cap rate would be. And I'm not saying that that would be the best thing for you. Everybody is different. How long are you going to be in the home? Is this just a short-term thing? Are you going to be in here for 15 or 20 years? The same program is not going to be best for everyone. So having that relationship with a lender is so super important, because they can kind of show you everything that they have, talk to you about what your goal is, and then kind of put you in the program that they think would be best.
So I was talking to my neighbor, who's much older than me recently, and I was telling him that I was thinking about buying an investment property, and I was looking at doing a 7-1 arm, so a 7-year adjustable rate mortgage. And he was like, "Oh, Sarah, don't do that. You're going to get yourself into some big trouble there." And
Yeah.
I was trying to explain to him why, and he was like, "Oh, anytime they can raise that interest rate." And I was having to explain to him that no, things are much, much different than how
Yeah.
adjustable rate mortgages used to be.
Yeah.
Back in the day, I guess. And so, adjustable rate mortgages, you are locked in for that current rate of whatever you lock it in for that time period of 5, 7, 10 years. And you still have the option to, refinance that loan at any time, but you're locked in at that finance rate for a 30-year time period. And the interest rate is guaranteed for that 5, 7, or 10-year period.
Yeah. And
Um,
the 2-1 buy down is probably one of my favorite programs that's out there right now. And, I'm not a lender, so I don't understand all of the ins and outs of everything that they do. That's why we have, lenders that we talk to and work with regularly. But I called, Tyler last week and was like, look, we need to have lunch. I need to understand this better and wrap my brain around it, because I can't advise clients to do something that I'm not 100% confident in. So we went and had lunch, and he kind of broke it all down. And when he was explaining to me exactly how things are different versus how it was before, because, I'm, yes, I'm a realtor and I'm in this market, but at the same time, I remember 2008 very vividly. I wasn't sure that I was going to have food on my table at some points. And so, you know, that's still in my head, just like it is everybody else's. And so listening to him explain that to me and some of the programs that they have now and how they're very different really put my mind at ease.
Yeah. And it's super important for us to stay on top of that, things so that we can give the best advice to our clients and direct them to the best experts that are super knowledgeable in that area. Um, a unique thing that I found is that so you're hearing all these headlines that we're headed into a recession. We are in a recession. One of the things that we see right now are the headlines that we shared earlier of, record high mortgage rates. And that is very true. And we are waiting for that peak to kind of hit. And we know from historical data that that's going to happen any minute now, knock on wood. And historically, what we know is that a recession means falling mortgage rates. So is the last 6 recessions that we've experienced in the United States and what mortgage rates did during that time period. So we know that the Fed never gets it right when it comes to trying to, get the economy back in line. They always overcorrect and then they swing back in the other direction. So we will see a time here coming up shortly where we're going to start seeing those mortgage rates get back down to a more adjusted rate down from where they're at right now.
Yeah, I think that, we'll probably get down to 5%, again, maybe even 4. I feel like a lot of people are trying to kind of hold out for that, 2 and 3%. You're not going to see 2%. I don't care what anybody tells me. You can say what you want to say. We're not going to see 2%. It was falsely given to us by the government to stimulate, and it worked, and that was great. It got the economy going again in a time that was needed. But just like the Fed is bringing it up now, they're the ones that dropped it then, and kind of gave us a little stimulation there. And like you said, they always overshoot the runway. I wish to goodness that they would just kind of like do a pause right now and let numbers like over the next couple of months play out and then see what's going to happen. And if they need to make another adjustment, make one. But they always want to kind of like pull in the reins as hard as they can. And that's what they're doing.
Yeah. Thank you for everyone that is tuning in tonight. We are excited that you're here with us. We do this live every single Wednesday at 6:00 Eastern time. We also put out a video every single Sunday about the area that we serve. So if you haven't already liked and subscribed to our channel, please go ahead and do that. We have a goal to get to 4,000 subscribers by the end of the month, and we'd love for you to help be a part of that if you're not already subscribed to our channel. And of course, one of our favorite parts of doing this live is answering your questions. So if you have a question about mortgages or moving areas, whatever, we would love to answer that for you. We do have a viewer that asks, do you think buying a ready to move in new house built in 2022 in January or February next year will be better as sellers will then have to pay property tax and will give such houses at a lower rate? Oh, good question. So property taxes are prorated. So it doesn't matter when you buy or sell a house in Georgia, you're always going to pay the property tax for the amount of time that you lived in that house.
Yes, and a lot of people don't realize that January 1 is kind of when that tax bill rolls over. So that's when you would see like sometimes name changes get confusing because like if you just sold the property now, it would not roll over to the new owner until January. And we usually are seeing those tax bills come out around, this time frame in October.
Yeah. So so if you were to buy a house today, they're going to take that 2022 tax bill and they're going to divide that by 365. They're going to calculate how many days did that seller live in the house, and then how many days are you going to live in the house for the rest of the year. And they are going to give a credit to you as the buyer because then you're going to have to pay that property tax bill. But it's a little bit confusing. And at the end, it all works out where you're only paying your portion of the property taxes. So it's not really going to have much of an impact on the affordability of a house.
Right. And I will say that, taxes increased, pretty substantially this last year, just because obviously home values increased. And so a lot of people did feel that. And so that is something that you want to keep in mind when purchasing, that, you're taking into account that, taxes can fluctuate, rise yearly. Normally,
Yes.
we're not seeing a huge substantial rise though.
Yeah. So this viewer, Captain Price, said that in Swanee, he had a $350,000 house and he got a $5,000 tax this year on his property. That sounds a little high.
It
I don't know if
does.
you recently bought that house. It could have been that the previous seller had a senior tax exemption or something like that. One of the good things, though, about property taxes is that you can dispute your property tax value or what that tax assessor is valuing your home at. One neat thing to know about in the state of Georgia, if you dispute that property tax, you have to go through a series of steps. And this is like a longer video, or we can talk offline about this. But you have to go before the Board of Equalization. And let's just say that you negotiate a lower home value that equates into a lower tax value, or let's just say that you don't win. But if you take it all the way through that process, you can lock in that current year's value for 3 years. So they can't legally increase your taxes for the next 2 years because they have to use that value for the next 3 years. So a good practice, if you're a homeowner in Georgia, is to always dispute your taxes every 3 years so that you're always locking in that value.
I do that every 3 years. Captain Price, I also live in Swanee, and my value definitely went up. It did not go up quite that much, so I definitely would encourage you to dispute that. And if you guys ever need to dispute something, you can always reach out to us and kind of help get us to help you do like a quick CMA to see like what the values and things like that. We can always shoot that over to you via email to help assist you with that dispute, because we definitely don't want you overpaying. And like Sarah said, you can then lock it in. So I always do it.
And even if you feel like the value of your house is actually the true value of your home, take a look at your neighbors, because if your neighbor's home value is not the same or equal to what you feel like your home value is, that also gives you another avenue to dispute the prices, because they can't treat your home unfairly compared to your neighbor's house. So that has a huge factor into arguing the property value that the tax assessor is giving to your house. So yes, reach out to us and we'd love to help you do that, just like Ashley said. Anthony says, speaking of property taxes, do you have to reapply for the homestead exemption after moving?
Yes, because it's attached to the property. And so, Anthony, if you were to buy a new property, you would want to file homestead exemption on that new property.
But you only have to do it one time. So once you do it,
Correct.
it stays with you for the time period that you own that home. And it's going to save you a small portion on your property taxes. So that is a good thing to do.
Yes.
Ryan says that his parents are buying with cash when they come up. What should they look out for? Obviously, they don't have to worry about rates. So what does the cash buyer need to take into consideration?
That's a great question. I would say just making sure that you're getting that home inspection and looking at that in detail, making sure that, obviously if you're buying in cash and you're not having to worry about the rate or worrying about closing costs, those aren't really areas that you would need negotiations, where a lot of people do. And so that would give you a little bit more leverage to either get a reduction on the price of the home, or potentially if something comes up on inspection, it would give you a little bit more leverage because you're not asking for any other, um, you know, incentive, so to speak. It would give you the leverage to be able to ask for some of those items, or again, a discount on the price. We actually just had a client, Karen. She is selling her home in California, moving here, cash buyer. And there were actually multiple offers on this property as well. It was an absolutely adorable ranch in Auburn, 300,000, and very, very popular. They were able to win out because they were cash, and they were able to negotiate that the seller was to leave pretty much all of the items on the interior of the home. And that way she's able to literally pack her bags and her clothes, move here, and just move right in. So it was really a good transaction for her.
Yeah. So I think, if your parents would have been in this market 6 months, a year ago, they would be probably one of 3, 5 other people with cash as well, making cash offers on a house.
Yes.
Um, and sometimes in other areas, more people buying with cash. And we are seeing that drastically change a little bit. So just like Ashley said, your parents may be able to negotiate a better price on the house because that's almost like a guaranteed sale to that seller. They don't have to worry about like the seller that I mentioned earlier, whose buyer's financing fell through halfway through, and then they're trying to buy a house on their next house. I guarantee that if we would have had 2 offers and one of those would have been cash, even if it's $5,000 less, they probably would have taken that $5,000 less offer because it was a much more guaranteed sale. We didn't have to
Right.
worry about the financing at all.
Yeah. And a lot of times when you have a loan, the things that you're trying to negotiate are, for them to cover closing costs or for them to, um, you know, buy down the rate at this point. And if you're not having to do that, then you're able to allocate that money elsewhere.
Mark asked if you can file for homestead exemption at any time or only certain times of the year. Um, so you have to do it by a certain time period each year. More than likely, though, let's just say that you're buying a home anytime after April, right? So typically, most counties have a deadline that you have to file for homestead exemption by April of that next year. Most all of the homes, though, that you're going to buy already have that homestead exemption savings in the property taxes that you're seeing. So you get the advantage of taking advantage of that if you buy in the middle of the year because that current seller, their rate for that entire year is based on their homestead exemption. You would just need to file it by April of the next year so that you can make sure that you get it and it continues to stay on your property tax bill. One of the services that we do for all of our clients is every single year is that we remind you and send you emails and call you and say, hey, don't forget to go file for your homestead exemption if you haven't already done that. Here's the deadline for your county. It's fast approaching, and we want to make sure that you're taking advantage of that savings.
Very good point.
Yeah. All right. So we are excited to answer your questions. Ashwan says, should I look for investment property in the same area I reside so that it's easy to manage? I don't have prior experience with investment property. Please advise.
This is one that I think a lot of people question. It really depends on if you plan to manage that property yourself or if you plan to hire a property management company. We have clients that do both. And so it really just depends on what you plan to do. I would advise you to really think about that in depth because you do have to consider if the dishwasher goes out at 8 o'clock tonight, you're responsible for getting that dishwasher fixed. And so if you are managing that property yourself, you're going to need to be readily available either tonight or possibly tomorrow to take a look at that. And so it really depends on your lifestyle if that's something that you have the ability to do, from the aspect of your time and your, are you a handy person? So that being said, a lot of people opt to have a property management company take care of the property. And that way you're not having to do that. You pay them a fee each month out of the rent, and then they're able to take care of the property. They're kind of like the liaison between you and the tenant. And this kind of takes out a lot of the stress that a lot of landlords, you hear people talk about all the time, the stress of having a tenant in place. This property management company takes on that burden. Sarah, you have a rental property yourself. What would you say?
Yes. So I do have a unique perspective on this. And I recently had a great conversation with someone that owns like dozens of rental properties. And so I have 2 investment properties. One is with a management company and one I self-manage. And the only reason that I chose that option was because the tenant had already been in place for 2 years and was a great tenant, had a great history. And so it was a really easy thing to do. And the conversation that I had with this super investor really changed my mindset around this. And the point that they brought up to me was that while things may be good now, there may be a time in the future where things are not good. And you as a as an owner are exposing yourself to a ton of liability and risk that you do not have a professional management company managing that rental. Not only if something were to happen at that property with the tenant, if you go about raising the rent and don't give them enough notice and don't do it in the proper ways or channels, you're exposing yourself to legal liability. If you ever have to evict that person, you become the person that has to evict the person, and you have to go through all that legal process and hire an attorney. A property management company will do all of that for you, and it's included in the fees that you pay them. So if they have to go and then evict that person, that's built into the fees that you've already paid them. They also just make sure that you're doing things legally and, through not violating any fair housing violations as well. And so, depending upon your situation, you probably just don't want that legal exposure. And for me, I was like, yeah, I don't want that. I know somewhat what I'm doing as a real estate agent, but we're definitely not property managers. But it really made me, go back and think about how I was currently structured, and that I need to change that.
That's another side of it that I haven't really thought of. It's funny because you and I talk about, being business partners. We talk about our liability and things like that all the time. But I never really thought about it on a rental property. Being the HOA, president of my neighborhood, I have had this situation where I have to go give a letter to somebody for their lawn or things like that. And it's so incredibly uncomfortable. So I can't imagine having to be the one that's going in and saying, hey, I'm raising your rent, or hey, I'm going to evict you. That just would not be a comfortable conversation.
Yeah, we recently also in the property that's professionally managed, that one just had a recent tenant turnover, and they ended up having almost 80 applicants for that property.
Oh my gosh.
I don't have the time to go through 80
No.
applications and find the best one and vet them and make sure they do a background check. And, it was such an easy process that I just sat back and waited. And a week later, I got an email saying your tenant's moving in on this date. Here's what we're doing, XYZ. And then, here's your check for your proceeds.
That sounds like the way to go.
Yeah, definitely so much easier. For sure.
And it does widen you up to other areas that you're not having to have one so close to you, because then you're having to go there, all the time to manage.
Correct. I did not know you were the president of your HOA.
Yes, I have been for 5 years. I don't know if I
5
would
years.
advise it. Yeah.
Wow. So
Yes.
what's the craziest thing that you've had to do as an HOA president?
Oh man. That's a great question. I don't know. We get crazy stuff all the time. And sometimes it's so petty because it's like, so and so didn't take in their trash can. And it's like, I'm sorry, they're your neighbor. Can you just say, hi, Mr. Smith, may you please take in your trash can? But no, they want to write the letter to the HOA to complain. We do have a situation, because we're an older community in Swanee, that, some of the homes have lots that are not actually part of the HOA. It's property that's back behind. And so people will say, they're not cleaning it up. And I'm like, well, that's not part of our community. So there's nothing I can do about that. So
yeah, that's hard.
It's very interesting. Yes.
We often get questions or comments from people saying they don't want an HOA, or, and for the most part, HOAs around here are not that strict.
Right.
You have some basic tenets and rules, but there was one neighborhood that's a popular neighborhood out in the Brazelton area, and they had a rule that you could not have any flags other than the American flag on your house. So if you wanted a college football flag, hanging from your house representing your favorite team, you were allowed to have it on your house, but only for the weekend. And you had to take it down after the weekend, which I thought was extreme.
HOAs can be finicky. And I'll be honest, the neighborhood that my husband and I moved into originally, shortly after we got married, we were renting for a little while, and then we bought a home. And, my husband is definitely a, don't tell me what to do with the home that I'm paying for kind of guy.
Right.
Obviously, being in real estate, I understand HOAs. He understands them. He just doesn't want to play by them. But we lived in a
And you're the
community with an
president? This
HOA.
doesn't make any sense.
Well, no. So the home that we lived in before, that HOA was super strict. I remember one time he has a truck, and he parked on the driveway, but the side of his tire overlapped. He wasn't parked on the grass, but it overlapped, like just hung over the grass, and we got a letter.
No.
And then a couple weeks later, a storm came through and a tree fell on our home. We had to have it cut down immediately because it was on our home. And we got a letter about cutting the tree down. And he was like, that's it. We're out of here. I'm not playing these games. So we sold our house there and we moved into this community. We still have an HOA. The difference is that was run by an HOA management company.
Mm.
And the one that I live in now is run by the neighborhood. And so it's more friendly, I guess, if you will. I'm not going to go knock on your door because you didn't cut your grass in a week. Now, if your weeds are out there for like a month, we got to have a conversation.
Yeah. So one of our favorite pieces of advice to give to buyers that are potentially kind of like weary of an HOA or considering a home but are concerned about the HOA is let's go talk to the neighbors. We'll always see someone out in the neighborhood, taking their trash out or they're out in their yard. And so having that friendly conversation and saying, hey, what is it like living here? Tell me about the HOA and what kind of, how strict are they and what does that look like living here? And so you can get a really good idea from the neighbors if you're concerned about buying a house in a neighborhood with an HOA.
Definitely. And it's funny, sometimes when I'm showing houses to people, they laugh at me because, I'm a little bit nosy. I'm going to kind of, peer over the fence and see what the neighbors got going on. And I'm going to look in their front yard. But y'all, this is for your best interest. Do you want to live next to somebody that, is not keeping up their property or, has the dog that's barking for 17 hours of the day? Like, you have to be a little bit nosy when you're looking at a property.
Yeah, we had a buyer who they were buying a house next to a house that had chickens in a neighborhood.
Oh gosh.
Like, chickens in the backyard. And clearly this did not have an HOA, so they could have the chickens there. But could you imagine living next to, do you have to have a rooster to have chickens to have eggs? Or can you just have can you just have hens and have eggs?
No, I think you have to have the rooster because I think that's how the eggs get there, right? I would suspect.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to do our research on that.
Well, clearly we're not farm people.
Yeah. Mark says we need a more strict HOA here where they are. I think they're in Texas. This is tons of cars parked in the streets all the time. Makes the streets hard to navigate.
Yeah. And I will say, like, that's the benefit. I don't know that I would want to live somewhere that doesn't have an HOA. I don't want a super strict HOA. I don't think that my husband and I would still be married if I did. But, I don't want to have no HOA because then you end up living next to something that you're not comfortable with. I don't want to live next to like a field of cars because someone has been allowed to have as many cars as it would probably be me. That's the sad thing. My husband would be the one that had all of the cars and I would be the one that's like, oh my God, this neighbor, but it's my house.
Yeah. So I live on the lake and we do not have, it's very rare to have a neighborhood with an HOA on the lake. It's just streets, houses around the lake. And so prior to me getting into real estate, 7 years ago, my husband and I bought this house and we were under contract halfway through the process. And there was a for sale sign that went up between our house and the neighbor's house. And I was like, wait, what? And it was like this tiny strip of land. I thought that was just like where our property lines met in the middle. And we talked to our neighbors about it. And they were like, yes, no one's ever going to buy that piece of land. You can't really build a house on it. You'd have to have like special permitting on it. They're asking way too much money. Well, 2 years later, someone bought that piece of land. And we were like, yeah, they're never going to be able to get a house permit. It's not going to work. They got the house permit. And then they start building the house. And, whenever you do the siding here, I guess it's the same everywhere across the country, but like hardy plank siding comes like in a tannish yellowish color. And so whenever they're putting it up, it looks fine, right? But then you never know what color the paint color is going to be until they actually paint it. So I come home around the corner one day and they started painting the house, and y'all, it is Smurf blue. A Smurf color blue house. No offense
Right
if you have a
next to
blue
yours.
house and you're watching this, but yes, it's right next door. And so that is why you want an HOA, so that you don't have a blue house next to you.
I mean, it's not for everybody, and I totally get that. And we do have a lot of people that do not want to be in an HOA. But I feel like in talking with those people further, we dig a little bit deeper and we find that they're coming from Miami, where their condo association has the most strict HOA that, if you breathe wrong in the hallway, that you got a letter, right? And so they're coming from something that is so strict and keeping you bound that they're like, I'm letting loose. Like, I don't want anything to do with it. But there's a good medium balance a lot of times.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank y'all so much for joining us on this live tonight. We had a lot of fun with the conversation. You can find us here every single Wednesday night, 6 o'clock Eastern. And of course, we have the video that gets put out every single Sunday. Make sure you connect with us. If you're thinking about making a move to Georgia, our contact information is below this video. We get really great people that reach out all the time, and we would love the opportunity to help you as well. Or if you're moving to another part of Georgia, we would love to connect you with a really great partner agent that we work with. Thank you for being here, and we will see you next week.
See you guys.
Bye.